The clearing, as far as I can tell, is quite a different approach to taking care of ourselves, of the environment, and of other people. Most processes that are available today, most alternative therapies, whatever, require you to do something in order to bring about change to your life. I used to think that was the case a long time ago. When I first started space clearing in Adelaide 26, 27 years ago or something, we were taught to use objects and devices to place in the environment to change the energy. So we were actively doing something to bring about change. My background, loosely put, is more Buddhist than anything else, although I don't particularly call myself a Buddhist. But that fundamental understanding has been a guiding light for me all through my life. So this process of doing, although it was working, and people were certainly picking up on the work and getting benefit from it, didn't sit too well with me for a few reasons. One, when we go into space, there's a lot of information in anybody's environment that's affecting them on various levels, whether they're aware of it or not. Sometimes we can be aware of things like electromagnetic radiation, but a lot of these other energies are very subtle and they're not really obvious, so we don't pay them any heed until we start to suffer the effects of those things. And then, of course, the conditioned response is to do something about it. I mean, this is just how everybody's being conditioned on the planet, pretty much. Do something about it. I was called in, quite a few people for consults doing space clearing using this particular method of mapping out the energy of the space and then going in, dowsing over the disturbances, checking what devices I need to make, go home, spend a day in the garage making all this weird stuff, go back to the environment, put all the devices in place, test the people to make sure that the devices were working and everything was holding okay. And I was doing a few of those and getting some decent feedback from people. And then a friend of mine suggested a visit to an astrologer. This lady, told me all the usual stuff they tell you when you go and see astrologers. And she's sort of saying that this work is very important for me as a way of balancing. And then she said to me, "And you're doing this work with your mind, are you?" And I thought, oh dear, she's lost the plot. Another one of these weird astrologers, all sorts of weird ideas. And I said, no, I'm using all these devices. I came from a reasonably conservative background, and using a pendulum for me was very weird. But to use my mind, that was even weirder and something I just couldn't come to terms with. So I said, no, I'm using the devices. But of course, the universe works in strange and wonderful ways. And 2 weeks after that, I had a job for a client, a mutual friend of the astrologer, by the way. And it was obvious when I went into the house, no one else home, they just let, all gone to work. But it was obvious that the energy in the house was pretty heavy. I mean, I could feel it. And so I did the usual. I mapped it all out, got home after spending hours tracing all these different energy lines on the map. And with my pendulum, I sat down to try and work out what changes were required in that environment. No matter what I did, the pendulum continually indicating no. Now, if any of you dowse, if any of you do any dowsing at all, you'll know that if you want to get the right answer, you have to ask the right question. And for 5 hours, I refused to ask the right question. I didn't want to know. I was continually try to go away, have a cup of tea, go away, have a drink, go and have a lie down, go and have a rest, come back, try again. And after 5 hours, I gave up. And I asked, using the pendulum, if the changes had already been made. And the pendulum indicated yes. That was the beginning of a journey of exploration, of course, into what was happening and how did it happen. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. I was a bit concerned, but I called the client the following day and I mentioned it to her, and she was perfectly understanding and accepted everything, no problem at all, which was good to know. That following day, I had another client in Adelaide. She again was only there for the first few minutes of the consult, went off to work. I finished up. Didn't take me 5 hours to ask the question that time. And I felt the changes have already been made. I went home, still had no idea what was going on or how it was happening. But I got a call from that client that evening, and she said, "Thank you very much. The house was great." She said she noticed the difference in the energy as soon as she put the key in the door. So now not only is the pendulum indicating that, I've already done the work without realizing, whatever I'm doing has been done, but people are noticing as well. So I couldn't deny that something was happening if other people are giving me that sort of feedback. So that began a road of discovery, of course, trying to work out what the hell's going on and, how could the energy possibly change just by my showing up and wandering around the place, picking up different fields and whatever. It was a different process in those days. I'd still go through and look for all of the different information in the earth energies, the magnetic field of the earth and the underground water, fault lines, metaphysical stuff, technological disturbance, all of those things, and clear them as I went, but basically by connecting in to the energy and asking to clear the charge. And that was working because I was getting lots of clients. I was very busy, but I still didn't really understand. And then it started to become obvious that, well, if I could do this, then, by showing up, then everybody's doing it. We're all impacting upon the environment by showing up, by who we are. The only difference that I could see then was that who I was when I showed up was not attached to the drama that existed in the house. I wasn't responsible in any way for creating it or supporting it. I didn't identify with it. A part of the training is we develop the ability to notice phenomena as it passes through the body. And generally we use chemical change in the body to notice. So when the body is exposed to varying different fields, emotional, physical, psychological, the chemistry in the body changes, sometimes very dramatically and obviously, sometimes very subtly. But when we're clearing, we practice noticing the change, and then we stop identifying with it. We recognize that this is just the body changing as a result of our being in a particular environment or with a particular person, but the feeling itself is not ours. And this is critical. This is really important. This was what I think turned my life around quite dramatically. Even though I was still actively involved and thought I was doing something to the environment, what I was actually doing was developing the capacity to be available to a lot more information with a much more open heart, rather than going into my own personal drama, the majority of which I wasn't aware of. So I started to notice changes in the environment, but I didn't take them personally. And I think that's a big difference between me and the clients. The clients were noticing phenomena and it was uncomfortable, and they take it personally. They would take it seriously, think there's something wrong here. What can we do about it? This whole process. So I kept working, and then as I realized that, I was actively changing it, well, everybody must be changing it as well. That's when I introduced personal clearing to the consults, because, it's no good going around and clearing the energy in a house if the people in the space are responsible for creating it. And we're responsible for creating it simply by who we are. We don't have to consciously do anything to create the environment. Of course, many of us do, with our decorating and the way we furnish a house, of course, and the energy we put into it. There's a sort of conscious energy effort there. But underneath that, behind the scenes, what's happening is that the unloved aspects of the self, the shadow aspects of the self, are creating the environment, which is often in conflict with what you as a conscious being want or would like. So we end up sort of doing battle with ourselves over stuff that shows up, which ultimately is a reflection of who we are, but those aspects we're comfortable with. So while we're in that conditioned state, and a part of that conditioned state is to project outside of the self for answers, to blame, to look at the environment, to look at other people, to look at situations and blame them. So we come from a very judgmental place. And all the time we come from this judgmental place. And it's not necessarily a conscious process, of course, because the shadow is not conscious. Then we continue to create chaos. All the time we continue to create chaos, it continues to show up. All the time it continues to show up, we get caught in trying to do something about it, to change our lives, to go to another this, to go to another that, to do this, to do that, to try and change it. But we fail to recognize the fundamental cause for imbalance is essentially our relationship to our environment. So I was recognizing that, and so I introduced the personal clearing because I think it's fundamental to everything else. If we try and look at doing something outside of the self, then we're going to get caught up in the idea that we need to fix something because something's broken. When in reality, it's our understanding of what's going on that's the problem, not what's going on. So the more I worked with people and the environment, the more obvious it became that you can't go into a space and clear it if the people were responsible for creating the chaos and they don't change. We have to try and lift the energy or clear the charge of both people and the space. So I focused very much on the personal. The personal is much stronger these days, that side of the work, than the space clearing is, although I still get called to do a few spots here and there. So now, the clearing. And this was where I think working with the environment was so important, because we either come from, in our past, our conditioning, we either come from a place of being incredibly sensitive and affected by our environment to a strong degree, where we find a lot of the environmental energy is very, very strong and uncomfortable, where we find we can't be with other people without getting uncomfortable. Or we come from a place where we've shut down in order to protect ourselves. So we've come from a closed place or a very open place. I came from a very closed place because of my early childhood, and I believe I might have been a very sensitive, young child. Because of my early childhood and what happened, I closed down in order to protect myself from what I considered at the time a hostile environment. And a lot of us do that. We don't necessarily know we're doing it, but we all survive, and we all choose ways to survive childhood that we then carry over into adult life. So we might deny certain feelings, certain thoughts, because there's a memory of being very insecure if we allowed them in. So we sort of keep them out, try and control everything that's going on in order to feel safe. And there are various methods of control, various projections that we have, that we employ, various belief patterns that we hang on to very strongly because we believe that we won't survive safely without them. Now, that has an incredibly negative effect upon our health and our relationship with others and our relationship to the earth as well. So, I just posted a little thing on Facebook recently that, everything that we believe, everything that we've come to accept as real has been built on a misunderstanding. Every problem that we face, every chaotic situation that arises has been built on a misunderstanding, fundamental misunderstanding. But to try to understand what that misunderstanding was is not possible from within the misunderstanding itself. So what we do when we come up against issues that we're not comfortable with, or whether we're in denial, whether we've closed down, or whether we're super sensitive, we will be experiencing life through a rather unique filter system. And we hang on to that filter system. We believe it's necessary for our survival. It's who we are. We identify strongly with it. But in actual fact, it's quite a negative experience and not who we are. And it's not necessary. But it's very difficult just to let go of that. Most people in their search for growth, for change, will let go, but then they'll find something else to hang on to. You know, a life raft when the ship goes down, a piece of driftwood, you know, another boat, another person, another belief, another idea. So we tend to try and hang on to something else. It's very difficult to let go completely without some training and some understanding of what's going on. So I came from this place of being very closed, which meant really that, you know, for me to have a healthy relationship was almost impossible, because I couldn't have a healthy relationship with myself because I was closed down because of anxiety, memories of whatever, trauma. And so I couldn't have a healthy relationship with myself. So how on earth could I be expected to have a healthy relationship with anybody else? And if I can't have a healthy relationship with myself, then I'm having, in a sense, a negative impact upon the environment all around me, and a negative impact to some degree on all of the people around me. But of course, what happens when you see the world through this rather unique filter system that you call your personality is you're judging people based on your understanding, on your current point of view, on your current belief system, and then they're doing exactly the same to you. So we've got two people coming into contact, each judging the other, each learning how to be safe in that relationship. Not very healthy place to be. So from this place of being closed, when I started to do the space clearing, what that required of me was to go into environments, to notice how the body, my body, changed as a result of the environment. But I would notice that when I was standing over a particular energy field. So I might be standing over an area where two underground water streams cross, and they generate a particular radiation. And that particular radiation excites the body. It heats it up. It stirs things up, and it can create nausea, can create headache, all sorts of stuff. When you're standing over that and you notice a change in how you're feeling, you recognize that the body's simply reacting to an external energy source. So I would step back off of that spot and the feeling would go away. I could step onto it again and the feeling would come back. So it became increasingly obvious that the body was simply reacting to its environment by having a chemical shift, and we go into that in much greater detail, much more information on this sort of stuff and the biology of the body in the workshops. Fascinating area. But we would notice change in the body. We would understand why the body's changing. We would recognize that the body, the feeling that is arising in the body as a result of standing on a particular energy field, has got nothing to do with us at all. It's simply how the body is responding or reacting to the environment. And if you do that for a few years, and you know, like I was working as a consultant, and it was pretty intense. I was doing lots of consults every day, many days of the week. So, you know, it became really, really obvious that this was what was happening. So then it becomes clear that the body, physical body, is like a radio set. And if you've got the radio set plugged in and you switch it on and you tune in, the radio picks up a radio signal passing through the air and interprets that signal through the mechanism of the radio into sound, which it then transmits into our environment. Then we hear the radio. We hear sound that we recognize, voices, music, whatever. If you change the station, of course you pick up different music, different sound. So you're picking up a different frequency, a different transmission, but the radio is just interpreting the information. But the body is doing exactly the same. The body is picking up information from its environment in its own unique way through its filter system, which we have come to believe is who we are. And it's interpreting that information. Now, it interprets that information either as a chemical change in the body, so there's a cellular shift, or as electronic stimuli in the brain gives us a different thought, different way of thinking, different attitude, whatever. The radio doesn't own the sound that comes out of it. The radio is just the device that's changing the radio waves into information that we can understand. But the music or the talk doesn't belong to the radio. And it's the same with the body. The body is picking up information all of the time from its total environment. It's interpreting that information as emotions, as physical feelings. But those emotions and physical feelings don't actually belong to us. They may appear to belong to us because we've identified with them strongly in the past, but that was the result of the misunderstanding. It's not who we are. We're like the radio. We don't own the thoughts or the feelings. They're simply passing through our awareness. The body is this biofeedback device that's picking up information and interpreting it for us to have the experience of being alive in a third dimensional reality. But the feelings themselves are not ours. Now, that took me a while to actually fully comprehend, because, we tend to hang on to feelings, particularly the feelings that are still buried deep in the shadow. The feelings that are buried in the shadow will continue to show up and continue to impact upon our lives and continue to create the reality that we find ourselves in. If we have issues around certain things, and some of the issues are of conscious, but most of them aren't. As an example, a friend of mine used to live just down the road from where we are now, in just on the edge of Melbourne, in sort of semi-bush area. And she was terrified of spiders, absolutely terrified. And she would stay in this house and she would see spiders everywhere, every day. I lived in that house and I didn't see one spider. So you've got to ask what's going on. I mean, how come this woman managed to see all these spiders? She had this huge fear of spiders, which was locked into the subconscious, which was projection, which sort of manifested all these spiders in her reality, but they didn't exist in mine. And so I didn't see the spiders. And this happens all of the time in all aspects of our lives. So we're continually meeting aspects of the self, whether we're conscious of it or not. Where we find we continue to judge those aspects are going to show up again. It's like if any of you have been in a less than pleasant relationship. If you failed to deal with what showed up in that relationship and you left, then the next relationship is guaranteed to create a stronger charge around those issues. If you believe you've got the neighbour from hell now and you don't resolve those issues within you, if you move to try and escape that neighbour, the next one is guaranteed to be from serious hell. Because you really have to face up to what's creating your reality. If you want to change, although even change becomes meaningless after a while, the need for change is simply the discontent that one feels in the present moment. But if there's no discontent, then there's no need for change. So what shows up in our lives is a product of who we've been in the past, who we believe ourselves to be in the present, and who we are going to be tomorrow. And if we don't have a fundamental shift in that understanding, then just continue to get more of the same. So clearing is about lots of things. There are a multitude of benefits from practicing this. And you don't have to wait till you die to benefit from it. It happens immediately, straight away. There's no delay. But if we continue to play out the old part, the conditioned mind, then of course we're just going to get more of the same. When we get more of the same, the conditioned mind wants to do something to change it. The more energy you give to whatever shows up, the more real you make it. I've often believed, and I still do, that we live in a make it up as you go along universe. But we're all conditioned to make things up. We're all conditioned to think a certain way, to believe a certain way. We don't need prison guards because we've got family and neighbours who also believe that things are a certain way. So it's very difficult to step outside of that, to see things clearly, if you don't have the training. Jung referred to the shadow as being a very important part of the self. Important part meaning that these were aspects of the self that once embraced and accepted created a much more complete, whole, balanced self. He said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This process, he said, however, is very disagreeable and therefore not very popular, which is why not many people show up to workshops, because a lot of people are still trying to fix it. A lot of people still want to do something. A lot of people still want somebody else to do it for them. If you understand what's going on, it is not a disagreeable process. I've gone into the shadow side, into the darkness many times. And it's empowering, it truly is. Because, I mean, even in my space clearing days, when I did a lot of consults, I would be clearing all sorts of dark energy, basically a strong charge. But it's an emotional sort of response to call it dark, to give it all sorts of weird names. And what I found that as I've been able to embrace all of those without fear, without blame, without judgment, then they become a part of me. They don't take over, they don't possess me, but they become an integrated part of who I am. And as these charge, this negative charge, is integrated into this heart, then that charge, A, can never affect me in the future because it's already been integrated. And B, to clear that charge in the future happens effortlessly. So we're all clearing to some degree or other. We can all embrace some information. Our heart, to some degree, is open and fearless. It's only these shadow aspects that lie in wait for us on dark and stormy nights that trouble us. But we're not conscious of those until they show up. And then the problem, of course, is when they show up. If the personality, if the filter system is still strongly identifying with blame and judgment, our body will go into an immediate reaction. We will judge that reaction as anxiety, as fear, as unpleasant, nasty, don't like this, don't want this, and try and do something about it. And of course, the moment you do that, what you're saying is that this manifestation, whatever it may be, is real. And the moment you do that, you're lost. Because if it's real, you've got to do something about it. I'm, with a lot of this work, I'm sort of reminded, and it happened today with a client, constantly reminded of the teachings of the Buddha just before, or well, on the eve of his enlightenment, when he's sitting under his Bodhi tree, contemplating a bowl of lentils or whatever, and vowed not to get up until he'd reached enlightenment. And he's sitting under the tree, And Mara, the god of illusion, sent the demons, the armies from hell, all those orcs that you have marching around your country down there, all stomping towards you. How does that make you feel? How does the body react? Not without thinking, just how would you react if you've got that lot coming towards you? And then he sent the dancing boys or the dancing girls, whatever turns you on. And how does that affect you? Then he sent the plagues and the pestilences. How does that affect you? There was something else, whatever. So he sent all this stuff. And what happened, I believe, in the energetic field of the Buddha was nothing. There was no reaction whatsoever. I was working this morning with a friend who had an emotional shock. Something was totally unexpected. And that completely threw the body out of balance. It's coming back now, but it was pretty traumatic at the time. So this is the sort of thing we're talking about. While we're not conscious of these aspects of the self, we remain very much victims to them. Because once the body is shocked, you've taken it seriously. You've taken it personally. Because if you didn't have the shock value in the body in the first place, you would never have experienced the body getting shocked. In fact, you would never have experienced a situation that allowed that to arise in the first place. We tend to see the world through eyes, conditioned eyes. We see what we expect to see. We understand what limited understanding we have. We judge and we blame without even being aware we're doing it. This is all a conditioned past. Everybody has a conditioned past to some degree or other. When you think that when you were born into this world, who brought you up? People with a conditioned past that never really questioned what was going on. And then you fit easily into a system that hasn't questioned what's going on, that all has conditioned past, and you better, take this conditioned past seriously, otherwise you don't fit in. So it's another process where we get sucked into believing that this is real, what's going on. It's not real, it's not who you are, it's just who you currently believe yourself to be. So me being closed down didn't allow me to experience a huge amount of information because I just shut it out. It was just too painful. There was some memory there, some trauma, some anxiety that didn't allow it to flow. So as I continued to go in space clearing and then later personal clearing, you sit down with someone and you notice phenomena. You notice a change in the body. If you're still into blame and judgment, you'll blame the other person for how you feel. And this is constant. This is happening all the time. And it's happening very often on a subconscious level. So then this just keeps the old status quo going. This state of conflict, this unseen conflict that's arising in every relationship without conscious participation, of course, on either part. So when I was clearing and I was starting to notice a broader range of feelings, but because I was able to say this feeling is because I'm tuning into this person or to this environment, this feeling isn't mine. What happened on a physical level in my body, what happened on a neurological level, was that the body could pick up information from its environment, notice change as a result of that information, but not identify with it. So it simply said, this is a feeling of such and such. This isn't mine, it's not who I am. And by doing that, I was changing the relationship I have with a broad range of feelings and emotions. And a lot of them could be inconsequential, nothing to do with me at all. But that's only because what's happening is that, all this information is showing up, but I'm working through it piece by piece, which is something most of us never bother to do. We are far too busy, far too preoccupied, far too lost in the past, far too looking into the future to notice all this stuff. This is a part of the training in the workshop, of course, to develop that ability and to understand what's happening when you do notice. So we've got this backlog of stuff that we haven't noticed that's playing out every day of our lives, and we're running to catch up. We're in fight or flight, trying to do something about it all the time. But really, we're just making it worse, guaranteeing it's going to show up tomorrow. And I was doing that for years. And it was a long time before I felt safe enough to start to explore my own stuff. But then you see, that happened in good time through the clearing work. And it happened in a way at a time that was no longer as intense as it had been in the past. Because when you change the body's relationship to how it's feeling, to what's going on, you change it in all levels. So some of the subconscious conditioning, some of the deeper aspects of shadow that I was still carrying around with me would show up, but they would show up with less intensity. And when that happens, what it means is that you notice all of these old patterns showing up earlier. And if you notice them showing up earlier, what that means is that they're less intense. And if you're really clever, you can pick it up in the gut. That's where you feel these things first, if you're noticing. They don't explode in the heart or in other parts of the body. If you notice them in the gut, this is the feeling of such and such. Now, I have a choice. When I notice a feeling, I can take it personally, which I've done before in the past, and I know where that road leads. Obviously, conflict in relationship, for example. Or I could simply say, this is a feeling of such and such. It's not mine, it's not who I am, and let it go and try and deal with this situation in quite a different way, basically a more compassionate way. And so the more you do that, of course, you're starting to starve that charge, the charge that has been building for possibly lifetimes, is no longer being fed. If you don't feed it, it's going to die. It's going to fall away. It's not going to show up. And when that stops showing up, it's an incredibly liberating period of your life, because you start to recognize that you're no longer controlled by your past, by the limiting aspects of your past. So the whole process is incredibly liberating. As I said, the benefits of this way of being are unbelievable, because you can't believe them because they're not there yet. They're just sort of stories. They're just things that I talk about. But you have to make them real for you. But you can't make them real for you if you don't change. If you don't let go of your past, it's going to continue to show up. Not that many people are really ready to let go of the past. And this is the only way this is going to spread, through people who understand what's going on. You can't promote this through advertising. No one can understand. It's not possible to understand this work until you've applied it, until you become practicing it. I had a long workshop in Vietnam, 10 years or so ago, can't remember. It was a 28-day program, and we had 66 people show up or something, lots of kids as well. And one lady, sent me an email after 6 years. She was there with her son, Down syndrome guy. And she said, during the workshop, I understood intellectually everything you were talking about. But it took me 6 years to really know what you were talking about. This work is so simple, so incredibly simple. It'll take most of you years to understand. Because you try too hard. You want to understand everything. Your conditioned mind has to know what's going on. And you can't know what's going on from within the tiny point of view, the tiny conditioned mind that you currently hold on to so tightly. Madness. Did you know that planet Earth is actually the Psychiatric Institute for the Universe, where they send all the crazies. Yeah. Some of you have sort of been here before. The room is full of repeat offenders. We've all come back. We can't get away. You don't need guards. You don't need prison bars because you've got a body that you take so seriously, so personally, everything that happens. Protected at all costs. No matter who gets in the way, we'll just take care of number one. And until you recognize the truth of who you are, you're going to keep coming back. And it's going to get worse. It's going mad at the moment. It's been going mad for a long time. Nothing new in the world going mad. But it's all a projection of a fear-based, polarized consciousness. And while you continue to judge anything at all, you're a part of the problem. You're supporting this illusion. And you don't know you're doing it. You think you're sort of fighting for the cause, fighting for the right. But really, from within the drama that you currently find yourself, you're just making it worse. So we need to break free from all of this conditioning. Really need to. And it doesn't matter what else you're doing with your life at the moment. You waking up to what's going on is of supreme importance. Even though this is all an illusion, it's all a joke, whilst you're lost in that illusion, you're lost in that joke, you continue to support it because you think it's real and you've got to do something about it to fix it. But you won't recognize that until you start to withdraw your energy from all of this stuff that you take for granted, that you think is real. And you start with simple steps, with baby steps. And you start by noticing how you're feeling at any given point in time. Nothing big deal, no special. And then you let go. You need to let go. You need to find a practice where you can bring yourself back into the moment and stop feeding the drama. And you'll find out that, if you continue to feed it, it'll continue to show up. If anybody who's listening out there this evening has experienced anxiety, quite common these days, you'll know that if anxiety arises in your awareness and you take it personally, your body becomes incapacitated very quickly. The shakes, cold sweat, paranoia, the works, panic attacks, eventually leading to depression. And if you don't wake up to what's going on before, you'll soon be medicated and then you're no use to anyone. My past suffered a lot from anxiety. I know what anxiety feels like and I know what it can do. And it was particularly strong every time I'd go into the States, every time I passed through US immigration, anxiety would be rampant. Only the States, no other country did it to me, just that country, every time. And it became really uncomfortable. You were expecting to be taken away to the little room and out come the rubber gloves and God knows what. And that's just a creation of your own mind. Although not necessarily so, because if you continue to follow that train of thought, it won't be long before they take you off to the little room with no windows and lock you up. And I recognize this because I was in and out of the States a lot many years ago. I was there all the time, in and out. And it became quite disturbing. So I did a lot of work on this, a lot of sort of clearing around what anxiety and what it means and whatever. And so there was a big shift. And that was first noticeable going back into the States through Hawaii. Well, that's sort of, it's a different sort of energy in Hawaii anyway. They're a bit more laid back than they are LA and Houston and places. But it was a totally different experience for me. There was no anxiety. So I was able to move in and out without any personal issues at all. I could still feel anxiety. So you could be standing in immigration, going into Miami or somewhere. And then you feel anxiety arising. And there's a lot of it in that customs shed, in that immigration hall. There's a lot of it. It's not just you. And you can look around, and you can see way down the end there, someone waiting, he's dark sort of guy, just come in from Colombia. And he's got a suitcase, and there's white powder leaking out of the suitcase. And that guy's got reason to be anxious. It's not your anxiety. So it's like the radio again. If the radio identifies with anxiety, it just turns the volume up. And if you turn the volume up on anxiety, you create a chemical cocktail you don't even want to know about passing through your body. And it's very uncomfortable. It's quite destructive, of course. Very, very bad for the stomach to have all these toxic chemicals of anxiety floating around in it. And then when you identify with anxiety, you just pass it on. It's like a relay station. Your bodies become anxious. You transmit anxiety around you to all those people that are standing near you. People start to move away from you. Don't feel comfortable. They start to get anxious. And pretty soon you've got a room full of people that have gone off the planet with anxiety. Because people continue to identify with anxiety. And it's the same for all emotions, all thoughts, all feelings. We continue to identify them. We think they're ours. And we think they're ours because of past experiences, intensity, whatever. But intensity is not an indication of ownership. It's just an indication of a misunderstanding that you've continued to apply to your life right through to the present moment. So there are many benefits, as I keep saying, but you don't recognize the benefits until you put it into practice. And then it becomes obvious. And then you can't go back. And you wouldn't want to go back anyway. Who knows where you are on this journey? No one knows. Really, it's impossible to measure how open the heart is at all times with all frequencies. Or maybe it's not impossible if you get connected up to the right sort of computer gear, whatever. But most people don't have access to that. We can't evaluate ourselves or others. We don't know how compassionate others are. We can only tell how compassionate others are by how they respond or react to us. Because if we still have demons hidden in the cupboard, then we're going to meet demons on the road. That's me talking away, as I often do, for hours and hours and hours about all sorts of nonsense. What will also happen as a result of you showing up this evening, whether you're conscious of it or not, is there's going to be some degree of stress release going on in your life over the next few hours. That was what all the yawning was about at first. So you should have direct knowing of the power of this work just by joining in this evening, which is far more powerful than all these words that I keep coming up with, all these stories that I keep spouting out. The heart is where it's at, and the heart is available for all of you people who are showing up without any sort of reservation whatsoever. And that is what makes the difference. That is what creates in you a safe place where you can begin to experience for yourself all of this as nonsense without taking it personally. But if we're not feeling safe, and very few people are, there's limits, of course, but to be completely fearless is quite a big thing these days. to put yourself in a more coherent environment, a more compassionate, heart-based, fearless environment is going to change you. And you don't have to do anything about it. Because what happens, normally in a relationship, there's this dance of the shadows. And where the shadows are very similar, you get a lot of uncomfortable feelings arising as a result of connecting to another person. And then when those uncomfortable feelings arise, the nature of the individual is to take them personally, to identify with the phenomenon, say, this is mine, you're to blame for my feeling this. And the other person, of course, is feeling their chemicals, and their chemicals are also uncomfortable, and they say, no, you're to blame. And of course, when you do that, when you push back, your body has changed, chemistry has changed quite dramatically, so the energy field that you're presenting changes and becomes very aggressive and uncomfortable. The other person reacts by becoming even more defensive, creates more chemicals in their body, they feel even more uncomfortable, and pretty soon you two are going to be screaming at each other, and you might even take it to emotional or physical violence, which is what's happening all around the world at the moment, of course. What happens when you take these people, and one of them has been practicing clearing, is that no matter what information this person transmits, this person's heart takes it without blame, without judgment, without identifying with it, and collapses all of the chaos before it can become a problem. So when this person is heard on a very fundamental level and feels safe because no one's judging, no one's blaming, no one's throwing it all back, this chemistry in this body exhausts itself, relaxes, and then you have communication. But you can't have communication while people are still coming from shadow, still blame and judgment. Just get more chaos. Now, it depends very much on how long you've been traveling down the road of sickness. Most people have been traveling down it for a lifetime, if not more. But it's only when sickness manifests that they think they've got a problem. But it doesn't happen overnight. You can't get an elm tree from an acorn. You get who you are. It unfolds according to who you are. And so by the time it reaches a point where it's obvious, that's when you panic, go and do something about it, get better, take this, take that, get something cut off, whatever. But if we were to recognize that this arose, sickness on a physical level arose, and it came out of something else, and that something else is how we relate, consciously or unconsciously, to our environment, very much in keeping with Bruce Lipton's stuff on cellular biology and epigenetics. So it's how we've related in the past. Now, if we can release all of that conditioning, that stress from the body, then it's highly unlikely that that disease state is going to manifest at all. So we need to put ourselves in a coherent environment as often as we possibly can. That was where the space clearing comes in. Clear the space, create a balanced, harmonic environment that's healthy for the system, to allow the system to change. Or with the individual, when I do a personal consult, to create an environment within the physical body where that system is relaxed, no more fight or flight, no more resistance, the system is flowing, it's open, it can start healing itself. The challenge, of course, is to maintain that state. And with awareness, we're all capable of holding it, but we all slip back. We'll fall back into the old ways, and we don't even realize we're doing it. It sort of creeps up on you. It's so familiar, so comfortable, like a very comfortable pair of shoes, or an old coat that you wear. You don't even know you've got it on. But it's affecting your environment, affecting your life all of the time. But we do tend to make it complicated. Do you want to say something else again there?
I thought I'd ask a question.
Oh, sorry, hang on a minute. Yeah, carry on.
So if you notice an energy in your body and you haven't quite got the awareness that it's not yours, or you take it personally, so you would then own it or accept it, right? Then that's when you're locking it into your body. Would that be a fair comment?
Yeah.
Right. So then, of course, you then compound whatever other issues or you may or may not have, because you've taken on board something that doesn't belong to you, but because you've accepted it and owned it as yours, you lock it into your cells, which then becomes part of your own issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you don't have to continue to do that, of course.
No. So if your awareness is then that you I guess would notice it more, and then if you recognise then that, oh, this does not belong to me, and clear it from there on, then you can work with it. Yeah.
The problem is, of course, that you're still going to feel the symptoms, because the more energy you've given in the past to any aspect of being, the more charge there is associated with it, more obvious it is, the more you've identified with it, the more challenging it is to release it. But when you understand, you don't have to release that issue, you just train yourself to release all issues.
Right.
Right, I've got another question here. Hello.
Susan, I think Nori's actually just answered the question, is once you've actually taken that on board as your own sensation or emotional feeling, you can then clear it out as, this is not mine, I don't want it, it doesn't belong to me. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
It require a certain objectivity, a certain awareness, a certain distancing of the self from it, a certain knowledge. But yes, I mean, a friend of mine was diagnosed as having lupus for 2 weeks. She walked around worrying, doing all sorts of weird stuff. And then she woke up one morning and said, it's not mine, it's not who I am, I'm not going down that road. Symptoms disappeared. It's happened to me with cancer on the lung. They wanted me to go down the cancer road. I said, no, we're going to Mexico instead. And I will get out, because the doctor in Holland, was such a lovely guy and very helpful. I said, look, I'll get an X-ray when I get there. They took an X-ray, nothing there. And a year later, I was on Mallorca, got a really efficient German company to X-ray it, no problem.
Yeah.
So,
Can I ask another question? I know that, well, my understanding of what you're saying is a lot of sort of from the shadows, so our fear, our insecurity, our anxiety. Do you find, or have you experienced anything on the opposite end of the spectrum where you get some people who are just hyperactive or hyper excitable? Is there clearing that can happen for that sort of personality?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I get to meet all sorts of people, of course, on the road, and doing this for so many years, and you do get people who are very extreme. Sometimes you just get the bipolar, where they swing from one to the other. But either state, a depressed state or a manic state, is just as bad as the other, because you're getting lost. The goal of clearing is to recognize that all that happens arises because we are in a state of conflict. We exist in a state of conflict because we are in a judgmental, polarized, conditioned state. And it's not necessarily about choosing, but that's where we're at. And our total environment supports polarized thinking, judgmental thinking. So your total experiences exist between these two extremes. With the clearing, what we do is we gradually collapse, bring the two together. And the closer they get, the more the mind is quiet, the more the body is relaxed. When the body is relaxed and the mind is quiet, a different reality shows up. Different people show up, different situations show up. Your reality is changing the world that you live in. But that, as I say, you need to actually practice it to realize the truth in that. So, of course, when you're here, when there's no longer any judgment, there's no longer any conflict, you cannot meet conflict on the road. And that is very, very powerful, of course, and that's how you change the reality that you live in. By no longer feeding the old one with your conditioned judgments, your preferences. It doesn't mean to say that by accepting all of this sort of negative stuff that it's going to take over or it's going to dominate your life or it just doesn't exist anymore. It can't exist out there if it doesn't exist in here. So the clearing workshop, of course, and this whole journey is about collapsing this. I mean, I've written a book, my last book, Collapsing the Wave. It's not a very big book, very important for anybody who's serious about changing themselves through understanding and awareness. Just a stepping stone, remember. Once you've read it and you've used it, throw it away, give it to somebody else. You don't need any of this stuff. You don't need anything. You've got everything you need already.